The Fox and the Turkeys. A fox spied some turkeys roosting in a tree. He managed to attract their attention and then ran about the tree, pretended to climb, walked on his hind legs, and did all sorts of tricks. Filled with fear, the turkeys watched every one of his movements until they became dizzy and, one by one, fell from their safe perch. By too much attention to danger, we may fall victims to it.
The Eagle, the Cat, and the Wild Sow. An eagle had made her nest at the top of a lofty oak. A cat, having found a convenient hole, lived with her kittens in the middle of the trunk, and a wild sow with her young had taken shelter in a hollow at its foot. The cat resolved to destroy by her arts this chance-made colony. She climbed to the nest of the eagle and said, "Destruction is preparing for you, and for me too. The wild sow, whom you may see daily digging up the earth, wishes to uproot the oak, that she may, on its fall, seize our families as food." Then she crept down to the cave of the sow and said, "Your children are in great danger, for as soon as you shall go out with your litter to find food, the eagle is prepared to pounce upon one of your little pigs." When night came, she went forth with silent foot and obtained food for herself and her kittens. But, feigning to be afraid, she kept a lookout all through the day. Meanwhile the eagle, full of fear of the sow, sat still on the branches, and the sow, terrified by the eagle, did not dare to go out from her cave, and thus they each, with their families, perished from hunger. Those who stir up enmities are not to be trusted.
The Peacock and the Magpie. The birds once met together to choose a king, and, among others, the Peacock was a candidate. Spreading his showy tail and stalking up and down with affected grandeur, he caught the eyes of the silly multitude by his brilliant appearance and was elected with acclamation. The Magpie then stepped forth into the midst of the assembly, and thus addressed the new king. "May it please your majesty, elect to permit a humble admirer to propose a question. As our king, we put our lives and fortunes in your hands. If, therefore, the eagle, the vulture, and the kite should make a descent upon us, what means would you take for our defense?" This pithy question opened the eyes of the birds to the weakness of their choice, and they canceled the election. Appearances can be deceiving. True leadership requires substance and capability. The Two Goats. Two goats started at the same moment from opposite ends to cross a rude bridge that was only wide enough for one to cross at a time. Meeting in the middle of the bridge, neither would give way to the other. They locked horns and fought for the right of way until they both fell into the torrent below and were drowned. Those who quarrel over trifles often lose their lives or fortunes.
The Dove and the Ant. An ant went to the bank of a river to quench its thirst, and, being carried away by the rush of the stream, was on the point of being drowned. A dove, sitting on a tree overhanging the water, plucked a leaf and let it fall into the stream close to her. The ant, climbing onto it, floated in safety to the bank. Shortly afterwards, a birdcatcher came close and stood under the tree, laying his lime twigs for the dove which sat in the branches. The ant, perceiving his design, stung him in the foot. He suddenly threw down the twigs and thereupon made the dove take wing. The grateful heart will always find opportunities to show its gratitude. The Eagle and the Beetle. The eagle and the beetle were at enmity together, and they destroyed one another's nests. The eagle gave the first provocation in seizing upon and eating the young ones of the beetle. The beetle got by stealth at the eagle's eggs, rolled them out of the nest, and followed the eagle even into the presence of Jupiter. On the eagle making his complaint, Jupiter ordered him to make his nest in his lap, and while Jupiter had the eggs in his lap, the beetle came flying about him. Jupiter, rising up unawares to drive him away from his head, threw down the eggs and broke them. The weak often revenge themselves on those who use them ill, even though they be the more powerful.
The Mule. A muley, a luxem from want of work and from overmuch corn, galloped about in a very extravagant manner and said to himself, My father surely was a high-mettled racer, and I am his own child in speed and spirit. On the next day, being driven a long journey and feeling very weary, he exclaimed in a disconsolate tone, I must have made a mistake. My father, after all, could have been only a donkey. We often judge our abilities based on assumptions rather than reality.
The cat, the weasel, and the rabbit. While a rabbit was absent from his hole one day, a weasel took possession of it. On the rabbit's return, seeing the weasel's nose sticking out, he said, You must leave this hole immediately. There is only room for one, and it has always belonged to me and my fathers before me. The more reason that you should give it up now, said the weasel, and leave its possession to me. As they could not settle the dispute, they agreed to leave the question of ownership to a wise old cat, to whom they went without more ado. I am deaf, said the cat. Put your noses close to my ears. No sooner had they done so than she clapped a paw upon each of them and killed them both. The strong are apt to settle all questions by the rule of might.
The Rat and the Frog. A rat in an evil day made acquaintance with a frog, and they set off on their travels together. The frog, on pretense of great affection, and of keeping his companion out of harm's way, tied the rat's foot to his own hind leg, and thus they proceeded for some distance by land. Presently they came to some water, and the frog, bidding the rat have good courage, began to swim across. They had scarcely, however, arrived midway, when the frog took a sudden plunge to the bottom, dragging the unfortunate rat after him. But the struggling and floundering of the rat made so great a commotion in the water that it attracted the attention of a kite, who, pouncing down and bearing off the rat, carried away the frog at the same time in his train. Inconsiderate and ill-matched alliances generally end in ruin, and the man who compasses the destruction of his neighbor is often caught in his own snare. The Widow and the Sheep. There was a certain widow who had an only sheep, and, wishing to make the most of his wool, she sheared him so closely that she cut his skin as well as his fleece. The sheep, smarting under this treatment, cried out, Why do you torture me thus? What will my blood add to the weight of the wool? If you want my flesh, dame, send for the butcher, who will put me out of my misery at once. But if you want my fleece, send for the shearer, who will clip my wool without drawing my blood. Economy may be carried too far. The Man Bitten by a Dog. A man who had been bitten by a dog was going about asking who could cure him. One that met him said, Sir, if you would be cured, take a bit of bread and dip it in the blood of the wound, and give it to the dog that bit you. The man smiled and said, If I were to follow your advice, I should be bitten by all the dogs in the city. He who proclaims himself ready to buy up his enemies will never want a supply of them.
The Horse and the Wolf. A wolf saw a horse grazing in a field. Putting on a grave air, he approached him and said, Sir, you must be very ill. I have some skill as a physician, and if you will tell me where your ailment is, I shall be glad to be of service. Said the horse, If you will examine my foot, you will find what ails me. But as the wily wolf approached him with a kick, he sent him flying into the air. The Goatherd and the Goats. It was a stormy day, and the snow was falling fast when a Goatherd drove his goats, all white with snow, into a desert cave for shelter. There he found that a herd of wild goats, more numerous and larger than his own, had already taken possession. So, thinking to secure them all, he left his own goats to take care of themselves and threw the branches which he had brought for them to the wild goats to browse on. But when the weather cleared up, he found his own goats had perished from hunger, while the wild goats were off and away to the hills and woods. So the Goatherd returned a laughingstock to his neighbors, having failed to gain the wild goats and having lost his own. They who neglect their old friends for the sake of new ones are rightly served if they lose both. The Goose with the Golden Eggs. A certain man had the good fortune to possess a goose that laid him a golden egg every day. But dissatisfied with so slow an income and thinking to seize the whole treasure at once, he killed the goose, and cutting her open, found her just what any other goose would be. Much wants more and loses all.
The Old Woman and the Wine Jar. An old woman found an empty jar that had recently held some prime old wine, still retaining its fragrant aroma. She greedily sniffed at it repeatedly, drawing it back and forth, exclaiming, "Oh, most delicious! How nice must the wine itself have been, when it leaves behind in the very vessel which contained it such a sweet perfume." The memory of a good deed lives. The donkey carrying salt. A certain huckster who kept a donkey, hearing that salt was to be had cheap at the seaside, drove down with his donkey thither to buy some. Having loaded the beast as much as he could bear, he was driving him home, when, as they were passing a slippery ledge of rock, the donkey fell into the stream below, and the salt being melted, the donkey was relieved of his burden. He gained the bank with ease and pursued his journey onward, light in body and in spirit. The huckster soon afterwards set off for the seaside for some more salt, and loaded the donkey, if possible, yet more heavily than before. On their return, as they crossed the stream into which he had formerly fallen, the donkey fell down on purpose. By the dissolving of the salt, he was again released from his load. The master, provoked at the loss, and thinking how he might cure him of this trick, on his next journey to the coast, freighted the beast with a load of sponges. When they arrived at the same stream as before, the donkey was at his old tricks again, and rolled himself into the water, but he found to his cost that instead of lightening his burden, he had more than doubled its weight. The same measures will not suit all circumstances. The Gnat and the Bull. A gnat that had been buzzing about the head of a bull, at length settling himself down upon his horn, begged his pardon for incommoding him. "But if," says he, "my weight at all inconveniences you, pray say so, and I will be off in a moment." "Oh, never trouble your head about that," says the bull, "for 'tis all one to me whether you go or stay, and to say the truth, I did not know you were there." The smaller the mind, the greater the conceit.
The Lion and the Gnat. As a gnat was buzzing around a lion, the lion said to him, "How dare you approach so near? Be off, or I will kill you with the least stroke of my paw." The gnat, knowing the advantage of his small size and his alertness, immediately challenged the boaster to combat. Alighting first upon his nose and then upon his tail, he made the lion so furious that he injured himself grievously with his paws. As the gnat flew away, he boasted of his own prowess in thus defeating the king of beasts, without the slightest injury to himself. But, in his carelessness, he flew directly into a spider's web, and the spider instantly seized and killed him. One must not be overconfident in their abilities. Even the smallest can fall prey to unforeseen dangers.